Good evening, members, officers and members of the public. Welcome to Tendring District Council's Planning Committee on Tuesday the 8th of July 2025. If you have mobile phones or other mobile devices on you, if you could put them on silent or turn them off, please. And if the fire alarm goes off, please follow the green marked exits to the doors. This committee meeting is being live streamed. It is also being recorded. The link to the live stream can be found on the council's website, www.tendring.gov.uk/live meetings. For the purpose of the recording, I will introduce everyone. I'm Councillor Maria Fowler, the Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I will introduce members of the committee separately. Councillor Maurice Alexander.
Good evening, Chairman.
Councillor Richard Everett.
Evening, Chairman.
Councillor Bernard Goldman.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Adrian Smith.
Good evening, Chair.
And our Vice Chairman, Councillor John White.
Good evening, Chairman.
Thank you, members. The council officers assisting the committee this evening are from Committee Services, Bethany Jones and Katie Coppenall. From Planning Services, Planning Officers Jacob Yasma, Matthew Lang and Michael Pingram, and our Planning Manager John Pateman G, our Corporate Director Planning and Community Gary Guyver, and our Planning Solicitor Mrs Joanne Fisher. Changes to the running order this evening. Item number 5 on the agenda, which is A12400560 OUT, Welwick, Colchester Road, St Osyth, will be withdrawn. And I do need a proposer and a seconder to do this. Proposed by Councillor Maurice Alexander, seconded by Councillor Richard Everett. Could I have a show of hands for the withdrawal of that item, please, members? That is unanimous, thank you. So the applications will be presented by the officer, followed by public speaking in the order of the applicant or agent, any members of the public who have already asked to speak for or against the application, a speaker from the town or parish council, and finally the ward councillor. Members of the committee will then have the chance to question the officer. Once all questions have been answered, the committee will then debate. When all points are discussed, finally, I shall ask if we have a resolution and call for a proposer and a seconder. The committee will then vote according to the normal rules. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. I've received apologies from Councillor Wiggins with no substitutions for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 10th of June. No one has indicated there's any issues with those minutes. Can I have a proposer, please, to accept these minutes? Councillor Smith, and a seconder, please. Councillor Goldman. Are we all in favour that I accept these minutes as correct record? Thank you, members. Item 3, declarations of interest. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Application 240189 full is the car park at Carnarvon Road to the High Street. It's a part of the Levelling Up, and I'm on the Levelling Up committee, and I would like to withdraw, if I may, from your meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, same for me.
The same for you. Thank you very much. Are there any further? Councillor White?
Thank you, Chairman. I was not able to attend the site visit for application 2500755 Grange Road, Lawford, and therefore will not take part in the deliberations and decision making on that application.
Thank you, Councillor White. No more declarations of interest? Thank you, members. Item 4, questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38.
Thank you, Chair. There are none.
Thank you, Bethany. I've already explained that we are removing, or we have withdrawn this item from the agenda, and for those who are watching the live stream and for the recording, the reason this item has been withdrawn from the agenda is that yesterday we were unfortunately unable to gain access to the second part of the site visit to view the heritage building, so we will be doing that again soon in the near future, and that is the reason. Okay, so we will go on to item 6 on the agenda, which is application A2 25007555/full, land to the northeast of Bloomfield Cottage, Grange Road, Lawford, and to present this item, our officer Jacob Yasma. Thank you, Jacob.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. There's 2 buttons to press now, so I just want to make sure I've done it right. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. So this item relates to the land to the northeast of Bloomfield Cottage on Grange Road, outside some 100 metres outside the settlement development boundary of Lawford. That's the application site outlined in red there to the north of Grange Road, and to the east of those 2 cottages there, existing cottages along Grange Road. The application site consists of a number of dilapidated outbuildings and structures, as well as it's fairly sylvan in character. There are established trees and brambles and hedgerows on site at the moment. That's an area of the site which gives a slightly clearer picture of the situation there, so that the distance between this eastern boundary and the nearest boundary of Lawford is about 100 metres across that field. There is as I've mentioned, up to 8 or 9 existing structures on site that's kind of related to its former agricultural use, and it's next to those 2 cottages to the east. So there is planning history here that's very relevant to this latest application. So I think almost all the members were on this. All the members present tonight were on the committee in April 2024, when a planning application on the same site, or slightly smaller site actually, came to this committee following a prior approval for the conversion of the most sturdiest, the structurally soundest building on that site to be converted from agriculture to residential. That conversion scheme was approved back in 2021, I think, and then a subsequent planning application came in, and in lieu of application to construct a two-bedroom dwelling in place of the converted agricultural building. That was approved in April 2024 last year, with a 3-year time limit. It was approved on a smaller site, as outlined there. That is the 2024 site, which is a somewhat irregular site, just broadly following the access lane or the access track there, and then basically just enclosing the agricultural building in question. Obviously, the application site now in front of members is bigger, it includes the blue, the land outlined in blue as well. So it's a rectangular site now. But the 2024 approval remains a material consideration of considerable weight because it is still extant and it is, there's a realistic prospect of that being implemented. And I'll return to that later in the presentation. So just a couple of photographs of the site in question. So you are familiar with the site, but just in summary, there's the existing cottages, top left-hand picture, and then the next one to the right is the existing site access with the site notice there on the gate. You entered that gate, you would have seen the site there, and then you probably also observed the majority of the existing outbuildings on site, which is proposed to be demolished as part of this proposal in front of you. That's a key difference between this application and the extant approval, which didn't include the removal of existing dilapidated structures because it was a smaller site, it was a different site. Again, just to give you an idea of the current state of the buildings and the site in question, that's 4 of the 8 structures on site there on the next slide, all proposed to be demolished and materials to be removed as part of this development proposal. And then moving on to the next part of the presentation. So this is just to show you the 2024 approval. It's a smaller dwelling, but it is still a 2-bedroom dwelling. The 2024 approval, and it continues to be a 2-bedroom dwelling proposed under this application in front of you, albeit a larger one. But the 2024 approval is very basic in its design and appearance, as you can see there at the bottom of the slide. And then in terms of the layout, 2 bedrooms, fairly modest kitchen and sitting area with the bathroom, single bathroom there off the hallway. I think importantly to note at this stage is that's extant approval. The 2-bedroom dwelling there would have been in the same location as broadly the same location as the proposed, slightly larger. Well, it's not a slightly larger. It's a clearly larger 2-bedroom dwelling proposed now, but it will be positioned in a similar location compared to that extant approval, and obviously the agricultural building that benefits from the prior approval. So moving on to the proposal, it's clearly different, but it utilizes the same access point. It broadly follows the same line in terms of the vehicular access into the site, and then the area where the proposed dwelling is going to be located is also similar to the extant approval, but that's probably where the comparisons end and where this proposal is different to the extant approval, because it's in the region of 100 square meters larger. It now contains or includes a separate cart lodge there in that location, further to the north, with the parking area in between the dwelling and the cart lodge. The proposal includes wide-ranging landscaping proposals and ecological and biodiversity changes and enhancements. So, for example, they are proposing a wildlife pond. They're proposing a new orchards. They're proposing in the region of 27 new trees. So in terms of this proposed layout plan, the trees outlined in green, they are the retained trees, and they are also the best species, the most healthy species of trees to be retained. And then the trees indicated in the black outline, they are all the new trees, the proposed 26 or 27 trees. I can return to that. I'm not exactly sure now. But it's a considerable number of new trees. Existing hedgerows to be repaired and improved. The scheme includes renewable energy measures like solar panels, and then the access is, like I said previously, in the exact same location compared to the 2024 extant approval. So moving on to the proposed layout, yeah. Again, it's a two-story dwelling. It remains a two-story dwelling with the front entrance door of that north elevation facing the cart lodge, and then you have the fairly wide hallway, and to the left of that hallway is the generous open layout, open plan kitchen, dining and living area. And then off the hallway to the south is a home office and a snug area / TV room. It's perhaps the generous open plan kitchen, dining and living area in combination with the home office and the snug area that makes this latest proposal bigger than the extant approval. It's those elements, but it's a clearly a different scheme, and the intent is a different design compared to the extant approval, and it is a different site as well. It's a bigger site compared to the 2024 approval. And then the last few slides. So this is the proposed roof plan. They're making good use of orientation here, and there will be an array of PV panels on the south-facing roof slope here, and on the east-facing roof slope there to maximize that solar, the track of the sun and solar gain. And then for the similar reasons, the scheme will include an open porch or a veranda along this sort of eastern and southern elevations, again to benefit from that south-facing aspect and the good sunlight penetration that will come from that. And then in terms of elevations, so the design takes its inspiration from barn-like features because it's in a semi-rural location. It will utilize horizontal timber cladding, red clay tiles, and then windows that are well proportioned to the elevations. As you can see, this is the elevation facing the parking area and the cart lodge, this bottom one, and then just above that is the southwest elevation that will face towards the proposed orchard and the main garden area to the south of the dwelling. And then the last slide is the other elevation. So the proposed southeast elevation, again, it just picks up on the features and the design elements that I've already mentioned. The proposed northwest elevation and the section. I think importantly, the scheme will remain a single-story building, restrained in its height. It will, because of the characteristics of the site and the decent screening already provided, and that will be retained along the side boundaries. The dwelling won't be visible from the street. If it is visible, it will only be the highest parts of the roof. You will catch glimpses of that perhaps in areas, but it will remain largely not visible from Grange Road and even further from the east as you come out of Lawford. It won't be visible from the west because of the existing cottages and the significant trees on site. So in terms of this proposal in the context of the fallback position, the 2024 approval, material weight has been afforded to this fallback position because as I've mentioned, the 2024 permission remains implementable, and the report clearly acknowledges that this proposal is different. This one in front of you is different in scale and size, and the site is also different, hence why that's one of the reasons why it's in front of you, because it's a different site and it's a technical departure from the development plan because it's a new dwelling outside the settlement development boundary. However, we are, you know, duty bound by law to have regard to other material considerations. So the proposal, the only thing here in terms of the tests, the legal tests around the fallback position, which revolves around, is there a fallback position? That's the first test. Yes, there is, because of the 2024 approval. Secondly, is there a realistic chance of the fallback position, the fallback scheme being implemented? Yes, you can't really conclude otherwise, because it will be, it could be irrational to say that there's no realistic prospect. And then thirdly, a comparison must be made, should be made. I think it's the third limb of the fallback legal tests where, you know, where the focus should fall, or that's where the focus fell for planning officers at least. So, but in this case, the proposal's high quality layout, the strong design features and the landscape enhancements, in officers' opinion, you know, decisively outweighs the fallback limitations purely in terms of that comparability test. And for that reason, we are recommending approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Yasma. There are no speakers for this application, so we will go straight to members of the committee for questions for the officer, please, colleagues. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm still trying to get my head around whether and if the fact that there is a fallback position sets the precedent that it is acceptable in planning terms to develop this site against planning policy normally. Can you explain to me why that is?
Yes. We are also daily trying to get our heads around this. So the short answer is because there's a planning permission in place on this site that is extant, i.e. it was only granted last year. It's with a 3-year time limit. There's still 2 years more or less to run on that planning permission. That means in plain terms, a two-bedroom dwelling has been granted here, and it is on its way, regardless of what happens here. So, almost in terms of the sustainability tests and the principle of development, that is a key material consideration of considerable weight. Considerable weight mainly because the planning permission remains extant, and secondly, there is a realistic prospect of that planning permission being implemented. So that gives it weight. So yes, when you ignore that and just looking purely at the spatial planning policies in our local plan, a development here is not supported by the local plan. But you can't. I would strongly advise you to not ignore material planning considerations, because the Town and Country Planning Act makes it clear that you should have regard to material planning considerations, and that brings some weight here. And rationally, a dwelling is on its way. Therefore, the principle of development is acceptable if you take into account other material considerations.
I get the point that we should have regard to, but I'm still trying to get my head around whether we have to.
By law, you must have regard to other material planning considerations, yes, unless I am wrong.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you must have regard to all material planning considerations when making your decision. If you take into consideration something that isn't a material planning consideration, or if you fail to take into account something that is a material planning consideration, then your decision is open to challenge. Because legally you are required to take material planning consideration into account. And I say, equally, if you took something into account that wasn't material, it's open to challenge. What weight you give to that is a matter for members.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Before we continue with further questions, I'd just like to ask the officer if there's any updates on the representations. I didn't see any on our update sheet. And Lawford Parish Council comments that this application looks like it's outside the settlement area and there should be a check on whether this land is for agricultural use. So that's not an objection. But there's no other third-party comments or objections been received.
Yes, correct. So apologies, I forgot to just clarify that. So since the publication of the report, there's been no further correspondence or third-party representations received. And the Lawford Parish Council's position has been covered or addressed in the report, but I'm happy to run through it again in case there's any uncertainty or anything that's not clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. Further questions, members? Okay, well, we're going to debate then. There are no further questions for the officer, and I'll be looking for a proposal on this one. Councillor Alexander?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jacob. That was a very interesting intro you gave to us, because it cleared something in my mind which had been puzzling me, and I think I was on the same track as what Councillor Everett was. It's a large parcel of land. I can't see it being ever used for anything else. It certainly could not be used for, in the buildings that are there existingly, it could not be used for agricultural use. That would never be allowed. So, yeah, so I can see Chair mileage in this, and the people have changed their mind and have put a different application in, and I think that's everybody's right to do just that. So, with your permission, I'd like to move approval on this application.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Smith?
I'm happy to second.
So we have a proposal from Councillor Alexander for approval as per the recommendation, and seconded by Councillor Smith. So if I could have a show of hands, may I remind you that Councillor White is not taking part in this item. So may I have a show of hands, please, members? That is unanimous. Thank you. That application is approved.
Thank you.
Item 6 on the agenda, A225, sorry, no, go to item 7. Item 7, which is A3240189-0/full, land at High Street Car Park, Carnarvon Road. And I did say earlier that our officer, Mr. Michael Pingram, was here to do this one. He's not. It's Mr. Pateman G. Yes, and of course, 2 of our committee will now be leaving the room. Councillor Smith and Councillor Alexander.
We good?
Mr. Pateman G, whenever you're ready.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I was just finding the technology amusing. Right, in terms of very quick presentation, really. I'm not going to put the entirety of the presentation previously on screen. I'm just going to park this quite quickly over to the proposed plan, layout plan, which was just to remind members of what was approved last time. So just to clarify what this is. So land at the High Street car park, the Carnarvon Road. This came to you previously for demolition of the existing multi-storey car park, clearance to the site, a new multi-storey car park, 28 residential apartments, 5 flexible units, and various other classes. I've just lost everything on my screen. No, okay. So ultimately, before members, this proposal was resolved for approval, and it would be resolved subject to a Section 106 legal agreement for affordable housing, biodiversity net gain in Planning Committee on March 2025. Sadly, since then we've discovered it's not possible to enter into a Section 106 to secure the monitoring of the biodiversity net gain. This is essentially due to the applicant being the landowner, and we being the applicant, we have to need to make alternative arrangements to secure the legal obligation. So to facilitate this, essentially we are adding a planning condition to the recommendation, which refers to the monitoring and submission of a monitoring and management plan for the biodiversity arrangement, and that the monitoring fee that would have been in the 106 previously is now part of a different type of agreement instead. These are subtle technical changes. Essentially, everything that was proposed before is exactly the same. The outcomes is exactly the same. It's just the journey to get there has to be legally different, because on this occasion we are the developer, landowner, and the local authority. And on that basis, in order to not sign our own agreement, we have had to work our way around this issue, and we've had to come up with a different resolution that gets us there. So this is very much, unfortunately, a technical reason that we've had to come back to members, because it's not the same outcome on that basis, and we needed to seek your permission to alter the recommendation accordingly. So you look at the recommendation, which is in the late papers now, which does fully draw out the need for the affordable housing rounds and monitoring fee in terms of a legal agreement, and a further condition which is added there as well. And you'll also notice that RAMS has been removed from a condition into the legal agreement. So there's a slight rearrangement of things. But we've reshuffled the cards, but the cards are exactly the same. That's pretty much the conclusion. But from a technical point of view and legal transparency point of view, we've had to come back to members to ask for your approval on that basis. I think I've done as much as I really need to, and my colleague Joanne can explain more if need be from a legal side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman-G. There are no speakers for this application, so I shall go to our remaining members of the committee for questions for the officer. Councillor White.
I accept everything that John has said, and it does so when he spells it out. It's a bit of a job when you're the applicant, you own it, and everything else. My question really is, has it made any difference to the amount of affordable housing provision?
No, it's exactly the same as originally proposed.
Thank you, Chairman.
If there are no questions for the officer, do we have a proposal for the recommendation, which is on page 99 plus the update sheet? Councillor White.
I'm more than happy to propose it.
In that case, I shall second your proposal. Could we have a show of hands to approve this application as per the recommendation and the update sheet? So that is unanimous for that one. Thank you, members. We will have a 5-minute break while we go and find the missing members of the committee. If you could turn the live stream off, please, Katie. Thank you. Welcome back to Tendring District Council's Planning Committee. We're now on item 8, which is the report of the Corporate Director of Planning and Community, A4 Revised Planning Service Enforcement Policy and the associated harm assessment, which is on pages 149 and 208 of the supporting documents for the agenda. And I will now hand over to our Head of Planning, Mr. Pateman G.
Thank you. I don't have any visuals to show you on this particular item, so I'm just going to quickly brief you on what is before you. The updated planning enforcement policy before you today represents a number of important improvements since the last version adopted in 2022. It ensures our approach remains proportionate, transparent and aligned with national guidance, and that the success of the enforcement services in the last couple of years continues. The key updates to the document are that it now integrates with planning control enforcement functions, whereas previously it was solely the planning enforcement functions. Building regulations has its own enforcement regime that it needs to follow, and this document now picks that up. This ensures that we meet our legal obligations under the new building safety regulator. And effectively, we should be addressing safety risks more effectively. We have a simplified prioritisation system in place. We are moving from 4 levels of judgment of how quick we go out to see a site to essentially a clearer system which is a standard 5-day response or immediate response if it fits certain criteria of, for example, a tree preservation order, tree being cut down, we would be out there immediately. So we have obviously got quicker actions for urgent cases. The traffic light system that was previously proposed and implemented by members is maintained and updated through the updated harm assessment that forms part of the proposal. We feel that this document gives greater transparency with live enforcement cases being published online, although there is, as I've just discussed earlier, a technical fault with that which we're fixing with IT at the moment, but that is the case that they are published online. And structured updates that fit the criteria of the case to update members of the public is a proposal going forward, rather than a continuous 21 update regime, which often led to the case that we were updating with no updates. And we would rather update to the stage of the enforcement case in order to give more information to the member of the public at the appropriate time. But there are safeguards built into that system as well in terms of review over a longer period of time. We feel that the document now defines what is harm and public benefit, and that's set out more specifically in the policies that I've outlined before you. We have outlined the differences between being unlawful and criminal breaches more explicitly. We've updated the legislation that the document refers to and the duties that the council, both as a whole and for enforcement purposes, needs to uphold, and that includes duties for the national landscape, and in order to promote in all decisions that we make that area. Ultimately, we have got considerations of biodiversity and human rights that are broadened and looked at as well as part of that. We have guidance on withdrawing enforcement notices that wasn't there before, and we also have protocols in place in terms of the use of data and drones and body cams and so on. So in all, we feel there's a kind of fairly comprehensive review of the document, adding to the success of it from 2022. We obviously, a fair chunk of that is taken up with the addition of the building regulational enforcement function being added to that document, which is why there's a further annex that links us to the LABC quality monitoring enforcement requirements. These are already requirements that we abide by under building regulations in order to comply with the building safety regulator, but it is necessary for us to formally adopt them as our process as well. So that is part of this document. and hopefully members will agree that it meets both public expectations and our legal obligations, and I am recommending it for approval before you.
Thank you, Mr. Pateman. G, members? Councillor Everett? And then Councillor White.
Thank you. It always concerns me that there's lots of lovely words on here, and that's what a policy is, but actually, at the end, does it mean anything? And in this particular case, I have experience in my ward of one part of this where it definitely doesn't mean anything. Yes, lovely words, but they're not actually implementable, and we cannot do anything to rectify a situation that exists in my ward. So I'm a bit worried that the lovely words here, all about Section 215, are actually just lovely words, not actually implementable. So can you tell me how the council can actually enforce untidy site notices, and how that might actually happen? Because we have experience of 2 properties in my ward, owned by the same owner, interestingly, where since 2018 we have been able to do absolutely nothing.
I would be happy to discuss that particular issue with you outside of this meeting. I don't think it's appropriate to discuss a specific case in this forum.
I'm sorry, but I actually come to the point that the whole point about having a policy is it should be implementable. It's quite demonstrable that this policy, in terms of 215 notices, is not implementable. So what are we going to do about that?
There's not a specific policy on 215 notices. There's obviously reference to what is legally available to us to use as a tool of enforcement. The policy sections are outlined in the first section of the document, page 168 on my version of it, and obviously they refer to planning enforcement standards, the site investigation, the enforcement assessment, withdrawing planning enforcement notices, and then you have goes on to the building control enforcement policy. Obviously, the previous document to this didn't define a policy. It was an entirety of a policy document. What we've attempted to do here is push them into defined policies in order to be more transparent and give clarity about what our considerations are. And it might be that ultimately what you're referring to in terms of whether or not we implement and go forward with something like an untidy site notice, that we would be referring to policy ENF03, which talks about how we would assess the case to go forward with that investigation, and whether we would then go forward to serve said notice. And of course, the public interest test and harm is part of that policy, to be very clear about what we should be considering as enforcement officers. If on a separate basis you feel that officers should be going forward on a particular site, I can discuss that particular site outside of this forum.
Thank you, Mr. Pateman. G, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. It says on page 183, under Section 215 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, the Council has powers to require an owner-occupier to maintain land or buildings if their condition causes harm and adversely affects the amenity of an area. In assessing the harm, consideration will be given to the appearance of the site and the impact on the amenities and the surrounding area. The Council will decide whether the extent of any harm to the amenity of the area justifies the service of a notice requiring the proper maintenance of land. We're not doing it.
I don't know how to respond to that other than, yes, I totally agree with what's written there. The point here is the judgment being made of whether or not the harm is to such extent to warrant pursuant. And I can only leave it at that point, that it is a tool for us to consider. We have to judge the individual case.
you, Mr. Pateman G. I'm going to go to Councillor White now. You have a question, Councillor White?
Yes, thank you. Found the document very, very interesting. It's always been a sort of secret thing what went on in the enforcement department, and to see it spelt out, I found that was helpful. The only thing that worries me, I'd had a word with John a little bit earlier, is that he stresses this will be open, but it isn't open. It's not open to us at the present moment because apparently there's an IT problem. And for us to implement something when we know the system ain't capable of being run, I think it's jumping the gun a little bit. The principle I like very much, and being able to look at the sort of things that we can enforce and those that we can't, and the reasons where we draw the line, whether we go ahead with it or not, I think that's very helpful. But it does worry me that it's still a secret sort of thing because nobody can get onto it to check it on the website. So all I'm saying to John is, can he really put the boot in with IT and get it up and running, because until it is, it ain't fair to the general public.
Since the implementation of the previous enforcement policy in 2022, an additional requirement that came out to consultation with members was to issue a regular update on the current cases. And I must admit, I'm probably due to do that this week, and I haven't done that yet. But it gives you all members a list of all the current caseload for enforcement. At the moment, enforcement have got a current caseload of 202 cases. Obviously, that's spread over 4 officers, and we do now have an enforcement monitoring officer as well, who will be proactively looking at all the construction sites as well as some of the park home sites within the district. We do have a further 350 cases purely on one particular area, which is Bel Air, that they're dealing with as well, because that's a Pacific operation. Of the 350 cases, for example, they are not online yet because there are sensitivities around the data that those cases hold. And it's for that reason why we do not have an automatic switch to put data immediately out on a website system. It is a case of defining what goes online and what doesn't, and ensuring that the appropriate information is there from an IT point of view. It is very easily solved, but we just need to deal with that internally to make sure we are not breaching any data or confidentiality issues. But I would say it's a very small matter that is not beholden to the policy before you as a whole.
Thank you, Mr. Pateman G. If there are no further questions, there are. Councillor Alexander.
Chair, I hope you noticed the polite cough. Okay, one or two things I would like to say, which I do find somewhat strange. If you remember, and for those who were here, when we were first told that planning enforcement comes under our committee, we were quite surprised to find that, you know, we were that important that we would have to handle such things. And the document that came out, I still have it at home, is about that thin. I notice it's somewhat grown fatter since then, and it's covering everything. In its early days, I must say, Chair, that I found it very difficult to handle. It was a complicated system. Officers had the complete decision. There's always been, Mr. Pateman G, an issue with me that we cannot call any decision in that's made by an officer. Now, I understand why, and I can see the logic of it, but it appears that our role here is just to rubber stamp this document, and then we're not needed until the next one is up. So I do find that somewhat concerning to myself. But apart from that, I have to lean with Councillor White. I think this is quite a robust, strong document, and it should work nice and smoothly if it works to the word.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. As I was saying, I'll draw your attention now to the recommendation, which is in the middle of page 151, which is recommended that the Planning Committee agrees to the adoption of the revised version of the Planning Service Enforcement Policy 2025, attached at Appendix A, along with Associated Harm Assessment 2025 at Appendix B, along with the LABC Enforcement Policy at Appendix C. Councillor Alexander? Yes. Proposed by Councillor Alexander. Councillor Smith? Thank you, Councillor Smith. Could I have a show of hands, please, members? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favour, and abstentions? 1 abstention. Any against? None, obviously. Okay. So that is approved. Thank you, members. So we now go to item 9, which is report of the Corporate Director, Planning and Community, A5, Biodiversity Net Gain, BNG, delegation and consultation arrangements in respect of proposals for habitat banks. And I will now hand over to Mr. Gary Guyver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And like Mr. Pateman's presentation, I don't have any visuals, so I'll just talk through the paper that you have. So the report before the committee this evening doesn't relate to any particular planning application or development proposal. It relates to the subject of biodiversity net gain, and in particular the decision-making process for dealing with proposals for habitat banks, which has been referred at the request of the Cabinet for the committee's consideration. So what am I actually talking about? What is a habitat bank? Well, it's not a building, and not a bank in the traditional sense. It's not a development. It's an area of land where a landowner, or often a farmer, can create a new wildlife habitat or expand or enhance an existing one to achieve a biodiversity net gain, manage and maintain it for that purpose, and generate some income from developers who can't meet their biodiversity net gain requirements on site. So in other words, if a developer can't achieve their mandatory 10% BNG requirements on site as part of their development, they can, under certain conditions, pay another landowner with a habitat bank to do it for them through the purchase of BNG credits. Now, as members of this committee will know, there is now a legal requirement for developments to achieve a biodiversity net gain of at least 10%. And there's been reference to it in some of the reports that we've had earlier. This requirement has applied to most development proposals since early 2024, albeit with some specific exemptions. Now, biodiversity net gain can be achieved in different ways, either on-site or off-site. And although the national rules require as much as possible to be achieved on-site, there will be circumstances when off-site provision is justified and where habitat banks come into their own. But for farmers and landowners, setting up a habitat bank and selling credits to developers could be a good source of income and a positive means of achieving farm diversification. But importantly, for the wider community and for the environment, it's supported as a concept that will help deliver on both national and local objectives for nature recovery. Now, we have landowners and farmers in Tendring who are keen to set up habitat banks, with some pretty much ready to go. But so we can consider and process habitat bank proposals, we need to decide as a council what our decision-making process and consultation arrangements will be. Now, because this is a fairly new concept to tendering and most other authorities, our constitution and schemes of delegation are not explicit on this subject. At present, all planning and conservation matters are delegated from the Planning Committee to officers, namely our Head of Planning and Building Control, unless they relate to the determination of planning applications where specific exceptions apply. Now, this implies that decisions on habitat proposals should be delegated to officers, but it's not explicit or clear, and a decision for the committee on that is being sought this evening. Bit of background, I mean, habitat banks are a bit unusual in planning terms. You don't actually need planning permission from the council to create or enhance a habitat. Planting trees, shrubs, hedges, creating ponds and other natural features are not generally classed as development under the planning legislation, and in most locations anyone can do it, and so the council's permission is generally not needed. But if developers are obtaining planning permission for housing and other types of development, and they're relying on credits bought from a habitat bank to fulfil their statutory biodiversity net gain requirements, and if landowners are looking to generate income through the sale of their credits, there clearly has to be some form of regulation and control, and also legally binding assurances that BNG is actually being achieved and that the habitats will be managed and maintained into the future, and the requirement is a minimum of 30 years. So although habitat creation might not in itself require the grant of planning permission from the council, there is a registration process separate to planning permission involving Natural England that requires the landowner to have entered into a Section 106 legal agreement with the council in order to place some controls on the land under the planning legislation. Now, BNG and habitat banks are relatively new concepts which postdate the adoption of our current local plan, and whilst there is lots of legislation, regulation and guidance at a national level, we didn't have any specific local policies or guidance on the subject. So in the absence of local policy and guidance, a report was taken to the Cabinet in October of last year seeking approval to adopt an interim policy on BNG that can be and has been referred to when dealing with BNG related issues and habitat banks, and that will be reviewed, amended and incorporated into the local plan in due course as part of the formal review being overseen by the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee. Now, the Cabinet report from October containing that interim policy is included in your agenda for context, and under recommendation A of my report, the committee is asked to note the adoption of that interim policy, which is applicable both to the determination of planning applications and to the consideration of proposals for habitat banks. Recommendation B seeks the committee's agreement for future decisions for the approval or entering into Section 106 agreements for habitat banks, as well as the decisions that might be required in relation to enforcement, be delegated to the Head of Planning and Building Control. Now, that's consistent with the approach taken by fellow authorities in Essex. Recommendation C is to agree that when the Constitution is next reviewed, changes to reflect the proposed delegation to officers in respect of habitat banks are put forward for consideration. And then finally, recommendation D is that we confirm that there will be no specific arrangements for public or wider stakeholder consultation on habitat proposals, aside from the technical consultation that we need to do with suitably qualified ecologists, given in particular the fact that creating a habitat per se is not something that normally requires planning permission. It's more around the process for linking it to BNG that requires the 106. I'll hand back to you, Chairman, but between Mr. Pateman G, Ms. Fisher and myself, we'll be only too happy to respond to any question.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Members, Councillor White, and then Councillor Alexander.
It's a very interesting exercise, this one. There's lots of questions, really. Say I was a farmer and I had a field and I was already getting a grant to leave it unused or farmed and to create a wildlife bank or something like that. Could it then be used as a habitat bank? And could Mr. Bloggs, who is short of 10% of his permitted BNG, could he then apply to take over my flower bank? There's so many new tricks on this game. I'd be rather interested in that. And the next one is still part of it, but it does give us, as a council, it gives us apparently permission to establish a habitat bank on council-owned land. So, for example, let's take Holland Haven, where you've got open bits of land which we use as a car park for the air show, or even a general car park. Could that become a habitat bank? So I think this is very, very, very interesting, and I'm surprised Gary's just said that several local farmers have pricked the idea up, and I'm damn certain they have. If they've got a spare bit of land, the only problem would be, of course, for tying it down for 30 years. But there's certainly some money to be made on these sort of things. But would we now get to the questions? A, could that bit of land be used twice? Could it be used getting a grant for keeping it as a wildfowl meadow, and then be used as a habitat bank and leased out to somebody else? So that's the first one. And the next one is, have we got any initial intentions yet of the council doing something on its own land as well?
Mr. Guyver.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor White. So there are restrictions on the ability to bring about the creation of and register a habitat bank if there are other grants being issued. I think they call that stacking. And there is elements of the legislation that make sure that there's no sort of double counting in that respect. In terms of the question you did raise, could essentially a developer buy a bit of land off of the owner and sort of maintain it as a habitat bank? Well, there are provisions by which a developer, if they own land that is separate to the planning application site, there is a route by which they can achieve their BNG on another bit of land, which would have to be tied into a 106, but normally they would tend to own that piece of land before they apply. And as well as that, and in terms of the council, yes, the council and local authorities can establish habitat banks on their own land, although it's a bit of a different process, because I think, as we touched on earlier, a local authority doesn't do a Section 106 agreement with itself. There are alternate routes to doing it. You can either have an arrangement with another authority to have a Section 106 on your behalf, or you can enter into what they call a conservation covenant, which is an arrangement with an alternative registered body with Natural England, although I still don't think there are many of those actually in circulation. So yes, you can do BNG on council-owned land, but it's a slightly different decision-making process.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. What I need to know, I'm wondering if I may, easier, because it's quite a lot on this, whether I should write to you, Gary and John, and and ask the questions now, because there's quite a few of them. For example, like developers, attenuation basins, could they be part of the bank if they were within the percentage of the land that's designated to this? But that's up to you.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Well, that's probably more pertinent to when you're achieving biodiversity net gain on site, as opposed to a habitat bank being off site. But yes, under the right circumstances, BNG could be achieved within a site. It may actually form part of the flood mitigation that forms part of it. So in some ways, you could have an area of land performing multiple functions. I think the challenge always with biodiversity net gain is it's got to be managed for wildlife. And if you have sort of intrusive activities like clearing out drains or something like that, they may not necessarily work together. But in principle, yes, you could have an area of land within a site that performs multiple benefits, including BNG as well as flood attenuation.
So, Chair, what I would do, with your permission, is to write to you and list it down, and then you can correct me, because I'm looking at the minutiae. One of the reasons, Chair, I mentioned this is the chicken farm that had a separate pond which they put in. I never understood why they needed this pond, but they put this pond in for a reason. Now, that would obviously be a natural, a gravitas for bugs and froglets and all kinds of things to go and visit it. So this is the kind of thing I don't quite understand, but I'd like to. So I'll write to you.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Are there any further comments or questions from members of the committee? If there are not, Mr. Guyver has gone through the recommendation, which is on page 210 and top of page 211 on our agendas, in our agendas. So I'll be looking for a proposer, please. Councillor Alexander and Councillor Goldman, seconder. May I have a show of hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is approved. Thank you, members. And that just leaves me to give you the date of the next meeting, which will be on Tuesday, the 5th of August. So I will now close the meeting.